My name is Elena Hart, and on the day this story begins, I was wearing a plain gray blazer, cheap black shoes, and an ID card that said, Intern, in small blue letters. No one in that office knew who I really was. No one knew that the company they laughed at me in was mine. No one knew that the girl they told to fetch coffee, carry files, and stay quiet had the power to fire them all. And by the time the truth came out, the boardroom would turn silent, and the whole country would hear what they had done. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it started. I had built my life around one idea: never let power make you blind. My father started Hartwell Global with nothing but a small office, one laptop, and a promise to himself that he would build something honest. He worked day and night. He trusted people too easily. He believed talent should rise and loyalty should matter more than titles. When he died, the company passed to me. But I never wanted to become one of those owners who sit high above the world and only hear polished reports. I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to see the company the way ordinary workers saw it. I wanted to see who was kind when no one important was watching, and who was cruel when they thought nobody could stop them. So I made a decision that shocked even my own legal team. I became an intern, not an executive intern with a fancy title, not a secret consultant, a real intern. I put my real responsibilities in the hands of a trusted outside board member and walked into my own company as if I had just graduated and was hungry for a chance. No one would know my name. No one would know my rank. No one would know that I was there to audit the soul of the company. The first morning, I stood in front of the glass tower that carried my family name, Hartwell Global. 17 floors of steel and light. People in expensive suits moved through the revolving doors like they owned the future. I remember looking up at the logo at the top of the building and feeling something strange in my chest. Not pride, not fear, something heavier. A warning, because buildings don't lie. People do. Inside, the lobby smelled like polished stone, perfume, and money. The receptionist glanced at me and gave a tight smile. "Can I help you?" I showed her my intern badge. Her smile changed instantly. Not because she was rude, because she had already decided I was beneath her. "That desk is on the second floor," she said, pointing without even looking at me again. I took the elevator up. On the second floor, the floor manager, a man named Grant Vale, was waiting. He was tall, with a perfect tie, perfect hair, and the kind of face that looked respectful only when cameras were on. He looked at my badge, then at me, then back at the badge. "Intern," he said, like the word itself was a joke. "Good. We need someone to handle the low-level tasks. Listen carefully, Elena, right?" I nodded. He smiled without warmth. "I don't care what school you came from or what dreams you have. Around here, dreams don't matter. Results do. And interns? Interns do what they are told." He handed me a stack of files so thick I nearly dropped them. "Take these to legal. Then copy them. Then organize the finance archive. And do not come back asking questions unless you want to look stupid." I looked at the files, then at him, and I said the only thing I could, "Yes, sir." That was the first lie I swallowed. And it would not be the last. The days that followed taught me something I had never learned in any boardroom meeting before. You can measure a company by its profit, but you can only measure its character by how it treats the smallest person in the room. At Hartwell Global, middle management had become its own kingdom. Grant Vale led them like a king who had stolen the crown. There was Victoria Shaw from operations, who smiled at CEOs and snapped at assistants. There was Darren Pike from finance, who spoke about culture in public and screamed at junior staff in private. There was Nina Cross from procurement, who made people cry behind closed doors and called it efficiency. They all wore the same polished expression. They all talked about company values. They all laughed the same cold laugh when they thought nobody important was listening. And they all seemed to enjoy one thing above everything else: breaking people down. On my third day, Victoria stopped me in the hallway. I was carrying a tray of coffee cups for a department meeting. She looked at me and frowned. "Who told the intern to walk around with drinks?" "I was asked to bring these to conference room B," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "Asked? You don't get asked. You get told. Big difference." Then she took one of the cups, looked inside, and made a face. "This is wrong. Did you even check the sugar?" I followed the order from catering. Victoria laughed. "You followed an order?" "Sweetheart, I'm not paying attention to what catering said. I'm paying attention to what I want. Do it again." She handed the cup back to me. Some coffee spilled onto my hand. It burned. I did not react. Not because I could not feel it, because I had learned something from my father. When people show you who they are, watch them carefully. Don't waste your strength proving you are hurt. Save your strength for when it matters. So I walked away with my hand trembling only a little. No one saw that. Or if they did not care. Later that week, Darren Pike made me stand outside his office for 40 minutes because I had knocked too softly. When he finally opened the door, he did not even look embarrassed. "Next time, use your voice," he said. "This isn't a library." "I'm sorry," I said. He leaned close and lowered his voice. "People like you last longer if they stop apologizing for existing and start learning their place. People like me." He didn't know who people like me really were. He thought I was a nobody. A girl from somewhere small. A girl lucky to have an unpaid internship in a giant company. He thought he was teaching me humility. What he was really doing was showing me the rot from the inside. And the worst part was not the bullying. The worst part was the fear. The quiet fear on the faces of the assistants. The junior analysts who never spoke unless spoken to. The accountants who kept their heads down. The younger workers who laughed too hard at bad jokes because they were terrified of being noticed. I saw one young woman, maybe 22, leave a meeting room with tears in her eyes. I asked her if she was okay. She looked around before answering. "No," she whispered, "but I will be if I keep quiet." That sentence stayed with me. I began staying late after hours. Not because anyone asked. Because I needed to see the company when the mask came off. And when the lights dimmed, I found the real Hartwell Global. I found expense reports that did not match project invoices. I found travel records tied to client development that looked suspiciously like private vacations. I found internal emails about moving assets quietly before year-end. I found a trail of shell contracts, inflated consulting fees, fake vendor approvals, and hidden transfers. And the deeper I looked, the worse it became. Grant, Victoria, Darren, Nina, and 3 others in upper leadership had built a private network inside the company. They were draining money through fake vendors. They were pushing out honest department heads and replacing them with loyal yes-men. They were preparing to sell a major part of Hartwell Global's assets through a side arrangement that would quietly enrich them before the official board even understood what was happening. They were stealing from employees, from investors, from my father's legacy, from me. I should have been angry right away. But the first feeling I had was something colder. Disappointment. Because I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that 1 or 2 bad people were the problem. Instead, I was seeing a system that had been poisoned by silence. Every day, they became more comfortable around me. That was their mistake. They stopped seeing me. And when people stop seeing you, they reveal everything. One Friday afternoon, Grant called me into the records room. The room was cramped and smelled like paper dust. He was standing with his arms folded, looking at me like I was a stain on his schedule. "You've been making errors," he said. "I'm trying my best." He laughed. "That's the first problem. Your best isn't enough here. Your job is to follow orders, not try to impress anyone." I said nothing. He stepped closer. "You know what I think?" he said. I think interns like you come here believing this is a stepping stone. It isn't. It's a lesson. Some people are born to lead. Others are born to support from the shadows. I looked straight at him. His eyes narrowed. Do you have something to say? Yes, I said, very calmly. He waited. I almost thought for 1 second that he might hear the warning in my voice. But he didn't. So I continued. I think you talk too much for a man who spends his day hiding things. His expression changed, just for a moment. Then he smiled. You are bold for someone disposable. Disposable. That word made something in me go still. He turned and walked out, saying over his shoulder, Be here Monday at 7, and try not to embarrass yourself again. When the door closed, I stood there alone in the records room. I remember staring at the shelves full of files, at the labels, at the locked cabinets. And I made a promise to myself, not revenge, not rage, truth. I would not destroy them with lies. I would destroy them with facts. By the end of the month, I had enough evidence to bring down every single one of them. But I did not act immediately, because I needed the right moment. A company like Hartwell Global did not belong to one boardroom. It belonged to the public, to the workers, to the retirees whose investments depended on its honesty, to the families whose lives were built around its stability. If I moved too early, they would cover their tracks. If I moved too quietly, they would escape. So I waited. And while I waited, they became bolder. That is the strange thing about corrupt people. The more they get away with, the less careful they become. I watched them plan a high-stakes board meeting. They believed it was for a routine asset review, but I had already seen the hidden agenda in the internal documents. They were planning to push through a sale of core company assets to a private buyer tied to one of Darren's offshore contacts. The sale would weaken Hartwell Global on paper. The profit would be split privately, and the losses would be blamed on market conditions. It was elegant in the way evil often is. Clean, quiet, designed to look legal from far away. But I had the emails. I had the transfer records. I had recorded conversations from allowed compliance reviews. I had copied the files to 3 separate secure backups. And I had one more thing. The original shareholder agreement signed by my father. The one that made it clear no major asset sale could happen without full board and owner approval. Approval they did not have. Approval they would never get. The board meeting was set for Tuesday morning at 10. On Monday night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, because I was finally ready. I stood in my apartment, looking at the simple black suit I had chosen. It was not expensive. It was not flashy, but it carried a different kind of power. The power of truth. I thought about my father then, about how he used to sit at our kitchen table late at night, signing documents by lamplight. He would always tell me, Elena, money can build a wall, but character decides whether that wall protects people or traps them. I had not understood him fully when I was younger. Now I did. The next morning I walked into Hartwell Global dressed like the same intern they had mocked for weeks. Same face. Same ID card. Same quiet expression. But inside, I was no longer the girl they thought they knew. Event to my desk. I answered messages. I sorted files. I sat through fake smiles and fake conversations. At 9:55, Victoria passed my desk and barely glanced at me. Don't disappear, she said. We may need you to carry printouts. I smiled politely. Of course. At 9:59, Darren walked by with a leather folder and adjusted his cufflinks like a man about to become richer than he deserved. Big morning, he said. Yes, I replied. He smirked. For some people. At 10, the boardroom doors closed, and I stood up, 1 floor above the company I owned. I walked toward the room where they planned to rob it blind. The hallway was quiet. My footsteps sounded too loud. Every step felt like walking deeper into a storm that had been waiting for me. When I reached the doors, two assistants looked up. One of them frowned. "You can't go in there." I held up my badge. "I was asked to bring the documents." "Not now," one of them whispered. "The meeting is in session." I looked directly at him, and I said, "Tell them Elena Hart is here." He blinked. Then he laughed awkwardly. "Who?" I did not answer. I reached out, opened the boardroom door, and walked in. The room froze. It was a perfect boardroom. Long polished table, glass walls, city skyline beyond, coffee untouched, folders lined up in front of expensive chairs, and all of them turned to look at me. Grant, Victoria, Darren, Nina, 3 outside board members, the legal advisor, the finance controller, all of them. Their expressions went from confusion to irritation in seconds. Grant was the first to speak. "What is this? Interns do not enter board meetings." His voice carried the same contempt as always. I stood at the end of the table, calm, straight, unshaking. "I know," I said. Darren looked furious. "Security." I raised one hand. "No need." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "How did she get in here?" The legal advisor looked uncomfortable. "Someone should escort her out." I looked around the table slowly. Then I said the words that changed the room forever. "I am not here as an intern." A silence fell. A real silence. Not the polite kind. The kind that comes when the floor under a liar disappears. Grant gave a short, sharp laugh. "What game is this?" I reached into my folder and placed a document on the table. "My name is Elena Hart. I am the legal owner and controlling shareholder of Hartwell Global." No one spoke. Not one. I placed another document down. "Here is my identity verification. Signed and notarized." Another. "Here is the shareholder record." Another. "Here is the board authorization chart." Darren's face had already started to lose color. Victoria stared at the papers like they were moving. Nina whispered, "No, no, this is fake." I met her eyes. "Then look at the signature." I slid the original agreement from my father across the table. The room became even quieter. The legal advisor picked it up with trembling hands. He read. Then he read again. He looked at me, then at them, and the truth hit him before it hit the others. Grant suddenly stood up. "This is absurd." His voice had changed now, less confident, more desperate. "You are not Elena Hart." I smiled sadly. "I know it is hard to accept when the person you insulted for weeks turns out to be the one who signs your paycheck." Victoria pushed her chair back. "You are lying." "Then explain the internal review documents in your drawer," I said. Her face twitched. I continued. "Explain the offshore vendor contracts. Explain the forged procurement approvals. Explain why you were planning to sell company assets through a private buyer connected to Darren's cousin's investment network." Now Darren stood up too. "That is confidential. It was stolen," I said. "And the funds that disappeared?" I asked. "Were those confidential too?" The room was no longer a boardroom. It was a crime scene. Grant slammed his hand on the table. "You have no idea how this company works." I turned to him. "That is where you are wrong. I know exactly how this company works. I spent weeks here watching you. I saw how you speak to assistants. I saw how you crush junior staff. I saw how you reward fear and punish honesty. And I found out why." I walked slowly around the table. Every eye followed me. "You were never protecting the company," I said. "You were feeding on it." Nina tried another angle. "If these accusations were real, why didn't you go to HR? I laughed once. A small, tired sound. "Our reports to leadership." Silence again. "Why didn't you go to the board?" Victoria snapped. "Because I needed evidence strong enough that no one could bury it." Grant pointed at me. "This is a setup." "Yes," I said. It is. That got their attention. I stopped walking. Then I said, very clearly, I set up this internship to audit the company. I wanted to see who would steal, who would lie, and who would break the moment they thought there were no consequences. You failed that test in every possible way. The legal advisor looked like he might faint. One of the outside board members leaned forward. Miss Hart, he said carefully, is everything you are presenting here verified? Absolutely, I said. I opened my folder and began placing the evidence on the table one by one. Email chains, bank movement records, board notes, recorded meeting transcripts, vendor shell company registrations, internal complaints ignored by leadership, signed confession from a junior accountant who had finally come forward after I assured her protection, and the final piece, the hidden sale proposal. When the legal advisor read the asset sale plan, his face hardened. This was never approved by the full ownership structure. No, I said. It was hidden because it was illegal. Grant's voice cracked a little now. You are exaggerating. I looked at him and felt no anger, only certainty. You tried to strip this company for parts. Darren swallowed hard. No one is denying that there were mistakes, he said quickly. But firing the whole leadership team, that is extreme. I stared at him. Then I said the line that made the boardroom ice over. Extreme is stealing from thousands of employees and calling it management. No one moved. I pressed the button on the conference call line. A moment later, 2 people from compliance entered the room, then a senior auditor, then a representative from outside legal, then, on the screen behind me, the chief investigator from the financial crimes division that had been waiting for my signal. Because yes, I had not only been auditing the company, I had been coordinating with the authorities. Quietly, legally, carefully. And now the trap was fully closed. Grant's face turned gray. Victoria stepped back from the table. Nina covered her mouth. Darren whispered, "This cannot be happening." But it was. The investigator on the screen spoke calmly. "We have reviewed the documents provided by Miss Hart. We have enough to open an immediate formal action regarding fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to conceal corporate assets." The room exploded. Grant started talking over everyone. Victoria tried to defend herself. Darren demanded a lawyer. Others resigned before the full scope reached the public, but not before their names were recorded. The asset sale was stopped. The stolen funds were tracked. The shell companies were dismantled. The auditors found that my father's old company had been used like a private wallet by people who had no right to touch it. Employees received protection, back pay reviews, and a new anonymous reporting system. The company's reputation was damaged. Very damaged. And that part hurt. But some damage is necessary if the sickness is to be removed. A rotten wall can be painted. It cannot be trusted until it is rebuilt. People asked me later whether I felt victorious when the truth came out. The honest answer is no. I felt relieved. There is a difference. Victory feels loud. Relief feels quiet. I did not enjoy watching people lose their positions. I did not enjoy seeing the panic in their eyes. But I also did not forget the faces of the workers they had silenced. The assistant who said she would be okay only if she stayed quiet. The analyst who cried in a hallway. The young man who had been told he would never matter. They mattered. That was the whole point. 2 months later, I stood in the same lobby where the receptionist had first looked at me like I was invisible. This time, she recognized me immediately. Her face went pale. I walked up to the desk. She stammered, "Miss Hart." I held up a hand. "It's fine." And it was. Because I had learned something deeper than power. I had learned that authority means nothing if it cannot protect the vulnerable. I had learned that leadership is not about being seen. It is about seeing others. I had learned that a company can survive bad numbers for a quarter, but it cannot survive a rotten heart forever. That evening, I visited the floor where the interns worked. The same floor where I had carried coffee, filed documents, and listened to people talk down to me. Now the desks were brighter. The walls had new posters about reporting misconduct. New leadership had already begun training sessions with actual accountability. A young intern looked up when I entered. She stood too quickly, nearly dropping her notebook. "Miss Hart?" I smiled. "Just Elena." Her eyes widened. Then she smiled back, uncertain but hopeful. And in that small moment, I remembered why I had done all this. Not for revenge, not for headlines, not even for justice alone. I had done it because silence helps the wrong people. And because every powerful lie begins with someone thinking no one will ever challenge it. But someone always can. Someone always should. So if you ever walk into a room and feel small, remember this. The size of the room does not decide your value. The title on someone else's badge does not decide your worth. And the people who speak the loudest are not always the ones who own the truth. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one carrying the future. Sometimes the intern is the owner. Sometimes the weak-looking girl is the one who ends the whole corrupt empire. And sometimes, just sometimes, here is the continuation. For a long time after that day, people kept asking me the same question. What was it like? They wanted one simple answer. They wanted me to say it felt exciting, or powerful, or satisfying. But the truth is, it felt quiet. Not because nothing happened, because everything had finally happened at once. The lies were gone. The masks were gone. The fake smiles, the fake meetings, the fake respect. All of it had fallen apart in one single afternoon. And when the room emptied, I did not feel like a winner. I felt like someone who had just survived a storm and was looking at the damage with open eyes. The boardroom had changed after that day. So had I. The same glass table was still there. The same chairs were still there. But the air was different, cleaner, heavier in a better way. Real people began arriving. People who had been ignored for years. A woman from accounting came to my office 2 days later with a folder full of notes. She stood in the doorway and said, "I kept copies of everything I saw. I never knew if anyone would care." I looked at her and said, "I care now." She almost cried. A young analyst came next, then an assistant, then a warehouse supervisor, then a man from procurement who had spent 6 years watching fraud happen one signature at a time. One by one, they came forward. Not because they suddenly became brave, because fear finally lost its power. That was the real beginning of change. Not the firing, not the arrests. The beginning was the moment ordinary people realized the truth would not destroy them if they told it. It would free them. I spent the next weeks rebuilding more than the company. I had to rebuild trust. That was harder, because trust is not a number on a report. It is not a line on a balance sheet. It is something people carry in their hearts. And when it breaks, they do not hand it back easily. So I did not hide. I met with employees in small groups. No cameras, no speechwriters, no polished statements. Just me, sitting across from people whose lives had been shaken by the same leadership team that had been smiling at them for years. I listened. That was the first rule. I listened to the assistant who said she had been yelled at for missing a lunch order while her mother was in the hospital. I listened to the junior accountant who had been told to stop asking questions if you want a future. I listened to the security guard who had seen executives carry out boxes of company records at night and had been too afraid to speak. I listened to all of them, and with every story, the same truth kept rising to the surface. This was never just about stolen money. It was about stolen dignity. People had been made to feel small on purpose. And once that happens for long enough, a company stops being a workplace. It becomes a cage. I hated that. Not loudly, deeply. There is a kind of anger that does not shout. It settles in your bones. It teaches you patience. It tells you to fix what was broken and not just punish what was obvious. So I made changes. Real honest. Leadership was reorganized. The compliance department was made independent. Anonymous reporting was rebuilt, so no one could bury complaints again. Every manager had to go through ethics training, but not the fake kind that ends with a certificate and a photo. The real kind. The kind that forces people to face consequences. And I personally reviewed every department that had been abused by the old system. Not because I liked paperwork, because I had learned that corruption survives when people stop checking the details. One morning, about a month later, I walked into the break room and found two interns whispering near the coffee machine. When they saw me, they froze. One of them looked like she wanted to disappear into the wall. I remembered that feeling. I remembered standing in the same building, in the same kind of silence, hoping nobody would notice me long enough to make me feel stupid. So I smiled first. That helped. "Good morning," I said. They both nodded quickly. Then the braver one asked, "Is it true you really worked here as an intern?" I said, "Yes." She looked at me like she was trying to decide whether to believe in fairy tales. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question. I leaned against the counter and thought about it. Then I said, "Because when people know who you are, they show you the version of themselves they want you to see. I needed to know who they were when they thought nobody important was watching." The two interns looked at each other. Then the younger one whispered, "Did you know they were that bad?" I shook my head. "No," I said, "but I knew I had to find out." They both went quiet. Then the braver one said something I have never forgotten. "I wish someone had done that for us before." That sentence stayed with me for days. Plea deals. After the evidence became overwhelming, others were preparing for trial, and the company, though wounded, was finally standing on truth instead of lies. I held my first company-wide town hall after that. I did not want a speech. I wanted a conversation. Thousands of employees joined in person and online. I stood on the stage and looked at all those faces. Some were tired, some skeptical, some hopeful, some still afraid. I understood all of it, so I said the only thing that mattered. I am not here to ask you to trust me instantly. I am here to earn it. The room stayed silent. Then I continued. You were failed by people who should have protected this company and the people in it. That should never have happened. And I will not insult you by pretending it was just a few bad mistakes. It was a system, and systems can be changed. I looked around the room. Not overnight. Not easily. But honestly. A man in the back raised his hand. His voice shook when he spoke. "Do you really think people here can believe in this company again?" I answered him truthfully. "Yes, but not because of the company name. Because of the people who stayed honest inside it." That was when the applause started. Not loud, not dramatic, real. It came slowly like rain. And when I heard it, I realized something had finally shifted. The company was no longer asking people to believe in a lie. It was beginning to deserve belief. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I went upstairs to the executive floor alone. The hallway was almost empty. The old leadership offices had been cleared out. The nameplates were gone. The rooms looked different, without arrogance in them. I stopped outside the boardroom and placed my hand on the glass. A month ago, I had walked into that room as a nobody in their eyes. Now the room had no power over me at all. Not because I had defeated them. Because I had seen through them. That is the real end of fear.